Hello everyone, it is me, Game Penguin 21, and today, well, we are going to be reacting to a new Harman Smith video. Hurrah! Okay, so, full disclosure, this is going to be a quick little update before we get actually into the full video of this, and I want to keep it brief. Let me be clear here. I have, since, at the time of recording this, I have now graduated college. Yay for me! I'm also going to be getting a new computer soon, so videos might slow down by the time that happens, so I might miss a week or two. If you just know that, just watch the community tab. I'm most likely going to post there saying, hey, the new computer's here. Give me a minute to set it up for that reason. But in this context, I wanted to talk about this video because, well, Elden Ring is now officially back in Harman Brain's mind. And yeah. So that's actually really cool. Also, I'm going to be probably getting a new job soon, so bear in mind that videos might slow down because of that. But in any case, today we're going to be watching the Harman Smith video that I mentioned at the top. Now, if you don't know who Harman Smith is, I'll give you the very quick TLDR. He is a Nintendo fanboy who basically says that Nintendo can do no wrong. And in all honesties, he basically is just got Nintendo so far up his ass in such a way that you can basically call him a hand puppet at this point. It is just... seriously. But we get ahead of ourselves. Today, the video that we're going to be reacting to is called Elden Ring fans desperately attacked the Zelda Breath of the Kingdom before launch. Oh my god! Where was all of the actual outrage and stuff? Considering that this man has also decided that it'd be a good idea to cope and seethe over the fact that Elden Ring is still a big game, even talked about, and stuff like that. Well, kind of. I mean, it's gotten into such a way that there is a DLC that's coming out soon. But again, we're going to get ahead of ourselves. This video is long, so it's going to be quite a long video, and hopefully speaking, we can get it done. Anyway, let's get started.
Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon, releasing June 10th, 2023. So I've been talking a little bit about Elden Ring versus Breath of the Wild. I've been making kind of like a lot of snide comments regarding the Elden Ring situation, and I would like to take a moment to kind of reflect on why. Kind of talk about like why I'm doing this, why I'm talking about such an irrelevant piece of last year's media that is Elden Ring, right?
I would like to know as well, because that's quite the weird conversation to be having in this day and age. Also, by the way, good to hear that your new book's coming out in like a couple weeks. How long have you been writing that? Have you just been writing it whenever you've been on the frickin' toilet? Like, oh yeah, I better write this book now, or whatever. I don't know. We took a look at his actual thing, and I'm not really that mad about it. It's more of for the sake of the video comedy stuff. But that's good that your book is coming out. Congratulations.
Tears of the Kingdom is already well on its way to outselling the game. It's going to destroy it. You know, if it wasn't for like, a couple of a handful of like troll reviews on Metacritic, Jim Sterling, Tears of the Kingdom would have a higher Metacritic score as well. Like, the industry did
true.
Everything
I will be honest on that.
In its
it is
power.
Actually true that Jim Sterling did leave a pretty scathing review that brought the entire Metacritic score point down by 1 point from like a 96 to a 95. Oh my god, that's such a big pointage difference. However, I will say that Jim Sterling is allowed to have his own is allowed to have their own stuff. It's allowed to have their own opinion, their own prerogative, or whatever the heck. And quite honestly, I haven't really watched Jim's video in a while, but she has gone full woke crowd, I guess. I don't know. I don't really care anymore. To be fair, though, I do agree that Jim's review was a little bit harsher than you would think. I don't really want to dig out the good old review. They might release a video on it or something. But, yeah, interesting.
The industry did everything in its power to try and prop up Elden Ring, prop up From Software, prop up PlayStation, prop up like the anti-Nintendo agenda while downplaying Nintendo, and they still lost, right? That is what this all comes down to, essentially, because last year there was a very big coordinated effort to downplay Tears of the Kingdom as being something that was going to be a rehash of Breath of the Wild, that was not going to live up to the legacy of the original, that wasn't all that good anyway. And From Software was the real entry, was the real go, right? Elden Ring was supposed to be like the game of the year. It was supposed to be like this big deal. And there were all these like weird narratives surrounding Tears of the Kingdom, from like the marketing and just like how Nintendo didn't show anything, and the delay, which a lot of people like still will continue to insist was due to the fact that Nintendo was scared of Elden Ring. Like there was
I mean, what? Okay, so first of all, let's attack each of these points individually. I was busy looking up some Discord stuff. But if I'm being honest, that does make the most sense. I mean, yeah, certainly the delay could have been because of they were scared of Elden Ring if it was ready, but at the same time, maybe it just wasn't ready because the projected things was just not good. Pushing it back was actually a good move, kind of, because, again, Elden Ring essentially took over that year because it was really the only game that came out that everyone fucking liked. And yeah, it's like, oh, it's a big conspiracy to prop up these other companies, even though the other companies, make millions upon billions of fucking dollars. And certainly there is a lot of discourse in the industry. So I'm not going to disagree with you on that, but is there actually a bias against Nintendo? I don't think so, given the fact that, they generally get good scores and stuff. The only real big issue that I've seen people really being talked about here is the fact that it's still 30 FPS on this console, and it runs at pretty garbage graphics-wise. Even though it kind of looks good, it kind of also looks bad in specific areas. It depends on your personal preference. I'm not going to give my own opinion because I don't have the game. Don't kill me, all right? Let me be clear. It's a very solid gameplay type game that tends to go on, and it's a sequel to it. I would say Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is much like God of War Ragnarok, not in the sense that they're like the same genre. I would personally say that it's kind of the same vibe as the two. As in the first game in the more modern series, that being the original, that being God of War, the new remade version, as well as not the remade version, the Norse version of God of War, and Zelda Breath of the Wild, both of those games were solidly bringing the formula of the original games back from the dead in such a way that really, really was good. And the sequels, in both contexts, scored about the same and expanded on it in such a way that made them more entertaining, but just didn't innovate as much because the innovations from the previous games were already there, so they just kind of continued that same energy onto the next game. If that makes any sorts of sense.
Elden Ring fans were unbelievably obnoxious, right? All throughout 2022, and for the first half of 2023, the first quarter of 2023. For the first quarter of 2023, there was a big push to kind of pretend that Tears of the Kingdom wasn't going to be nearly as good, that Elden Ring would go on to be like one of the best, most well-received games ever made, that Zelda was like just an irrelevant like mark on history, right? Like Zelda was a dying brand. And of course, this is a mindset that like the industry has been trying to push since like the 90s, ever since the introduction of Sony PlayStation. Ever since,
if you really look at the history of it, Nintendo had a lot going for it back in the 80s and 90s. But when Sony did come along, they basically just exponentially increased the entirety of their market share to the point of where Xbox is really also competing on the same level, even though they're only like third best in terms of that. But to be fair, they did tend to run away with their victories, and that's why the PlayStation 2 had some of the best games ever made in gaming history, according to most people. I wouldn't say that they're the most amount of stuff, but I would say that a lot of good games did tend to come out of the PlayStation 2 era. Now, the PlayStation 3 kind of carried on that, but a little bit weird with the original Xbox and Xbox 360 and stuff, and eventually, like, Microsoft kind of settled in around 2001. Now, again, if I'm being honest here, Nintendo is not a bad company, and I don't know of anyone other than maybe the most extremist of extreme fanboys that would take any legitimate criticism of of Nintendo and take it as such a way that the entirety of the market and the people are against it. It's like they still make a lot of fucking money, and I believe that they're still in second place and stuff. But yeah, I don't know where he's getting a lot of this from, other than maybe some of the troll comments, which he might take a little bit too seriously. But in all honesty, it's quite interesting. Quite interesting.
Ever since, like, even as early as Ocarina of Time, we saw these weird conspiracies being pushed that Metal Gear Solid was better than Ocarina. That like, every Zelda game after Ocarina was just a stale rehash of it. And now we're kind of seeing with Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild that like, these graphics, they're ugly. Like there's nothing impressive about this incredible physics engine. Where there's nothing like interesting or fresh and original about these ideas. They're just rehashes of Ubisoft games. They're not like From Software games at all, which are just peak open world action RPGs, right? The narrative was going.
You really should edit these videos a little bit more so that way, you don't have these long pauses and stuff. At least the way that I do it, when I make a long pause, I edit out most of it to the best of my ability. And if there is a long pause, I try to edit that out to the best of my ability. Again, when I edit the audio and stuff down. But I don't know of anyone that's kind of complaining about, like, the physics engine and stuff like that, because if that is an actual legitimate criticism, the only way that I could see it is that it's the same thing as Breath of the Wild. To, again, bring in the comparison that I made before, Zelda Breath of the Wild is to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom as God of War is to God of War Ragnarok. They're the same game, base stats-wise, but the sequel has a lot to live up to when you compare it to the previous game. And the fact that both of these games, the sequels, that is, to both of these styles of games, are able to continuously and keep the exact same energy while adding on top of an extra layer of quite interesting sprinkles that, add a little bit of spice to the mix, is quite impressive, at least today in modern gaming industry terms. Again, both of these games could have been absolute failures, in all honesty, because of both of the previous games, again, making the comparison to the previous games in their respective series, both of those previous games being able to maintain a very good, solid base, but built on top of that solid base, even after the house has already been built, is quite interesting. Yes, certainly there's a lot of things that are copied over, but that's just to kind of expedite the process to get these games out quickly, and most people understand that. The only, again, biggest criticism that I can see with Zelda Breath of the Wild is the 30 FPS thing, and people have already debunked this over and over again. The reason why it's still 30 FPS, and that's a little bit unacceptable, but acceptable when you put it into the specific context that it's still on the Switch, which is an old-ass fucking system that's like 13, 14 years old at this point. When you put it in that context, the 30 FPS actually does make a little bit of sense. Do people want more FPS and want more good graphics out of this games? Absolutely. 100% hands down, no questions. But given the times and given what Nintendo is working with, you can kind of get where people are coming from when they talk about things like the graphics not being as good or as polished as they could be for a sequel like this.
Along those lines for a very long time until Tears of the Kingdom actually came out, until people got to see it and got to play it and got to experience it for the first time. Not only is Tears of the Kingdom like better than Breath of the Wild in a lot of ways, it's doing a lot of things that a lot of games simply aren't doing, period. Like when people used to say that like Tears of the Kingdom was ripping off like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, they neglected to mention the fact that, like, Nuts and Bolts was not a proper Banjo-Kazooie game. It was not a 3D platformer with vehicle building mechanics, right? The way Zelda is a 3D Breath of the Wild game with vehicle building mechanics, right? Zelda took the idea of like building things, sticking them together, and like giving all these cool vehicles, and really made something cool, fresh, and interesting with it. Like when you like think outside the box in this game, when you like make bridges out of like 30 logs, or build a boat, or like build a glider, right? And then like use those tools to like accomplish some goal in some way, shape, or form. Like you really get a sense that This is a masterpiece. There's nothing like this out there, period. And of course, there are plenty of people who are acknowledging
What?
this. You know, lots of like game
Yeah,
developers.
hold, pause. What the fuck do you mean there's nothing like this out there, period? Okay, so let me break down this point. He's essentially saying that this game is a masterpiece because it has vehicle building mechanics, which no other game has. Despite the fact that he said Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which is essentially the same gaming mechanics. How does that make any form of any sense here? Like, how does that register as like, oh yeah, this is a thing? What? That makes no sense. Like, literally no sense if you really think about it. But again, it's not just Zelda Breath of the Wild that has like these vehicle building type mechanics. One big game that I know that's more of an indie game is Besiege. If you have never heard of this one you have to basically use wheels and building mechanics in order to knock down and besiege a castle, essentially. It's an indie game, certainly, but at the same time, it does utilize a lot of, not exactly the same, but a lot of similar physics, simulations, and things like that. It's a really good game. I would recommend it if you got like the money lying around. There's some pretty good mods and things out for it. Would recommend. Pretty solid. But yeah, there are other games out there, but I can't think of off the top of my head because I don't play those kinds of games often enough to give my personal opinion on them, except for Besiege. That I wouldn't know, and that there is a lot of different games out there for that sort of niche, technically. So yeah, it's not original, but a lot of people like it. The fact that they put the pieces together appropriately and in a way that makes sense and is actually more beneficial and really cool.
Nothing like this out there, period. And of course, there are plenty of people who are acknowledging this. You know, lots of like game developers on Twitter are like admitting that like they are way behind Nintendo, but there is a very real demographic of people who still refuse to admit it. They insist that there's something wrong with the physics engine. They insist the game isn't all that original. They insist there's something wrong with the weapon durability system, which which was not true even in Breath of the Wild, but in Tears of the Kingdom, if you're having problems with weapon durability, that's because you don't know how fusion works. Right? They're trying to like try to say the plot isn't very good. They're trying to say the dungeons aren't great. They're trying to say that the open world doesn't innovate enough. They're trying to say the plot doesn't make any sense. None of this is true, and like anyone who's spent any amount of time with the game will tell you that. But there is a very real push to try and downplay this game as much as possible. And I really wonder how much this is going to stick, because I think when Breath of the Wild came out, a lot of people really convinced themselves that this was just a one-off thing, this was just a fluke, that Nintendo would go back to putting out mediocre Zelda games after this, that they would be acquired by PlayStation or whatever. Like, that was the narrative, right? Remember back when Horizon Zero Dawn was, like, better than Zelda? Like,
I don't know of a single person that said Horizon Zero Dawn was better than Zelda, other than maybe the Xbox fanboys. I'm gonna be honest with you, Chief. Don't listen to the Xbox. Fuck, why did I say Xbox fanboys? That's stupid. But I meant the PlayStation. You know what I mean? The fucking fanboys, the people who are like Harman here, but they play for like another team. They wear a different hat, same shit, different anus, or whatever the fuck. Look, man, I'm gonna be honest here, Chief. It's not as original as you think it is. It really isn't. There isn't a lot out there that is original in terms of Zelda. Now, Zelda in and of itself is a good game. Don't get me wrong. Zelda in and of itself is a great game, and Nintendo does make really good properties when they make really good properties. But not all their properties are bangers, and not everything that they do is a banger industry. But if there was a point that I wanted to talk about, like his very first point where it's like, oh, these fanboys or something like that. Look, man, while you might think that Nintendo is getting biased against or whatever, I don't know if that's even fucking true. And it's just, it's hard to argue with a video when I let it play for that long, because I don't like to write down or script my videos. And some people are like, oh, you should probably script your videos. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, the way that I make my videos has worked for me for a long time, and I like that I don't have to script things out. I used to try to, but it's just bad. Anyway, rant over. Let's continue with this video. Dumb points all around.
Same energy, right? The thing about Tears of the Kingdom, it's not necessarily that much better than Breath of the Wild. Both games are great, but the thing about Tears of the Kingdom is that it's a follow-up that's just as well received as the original, with like its own innovativeness, its own creativity, its own design, its own.
And I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I'm very much in agreement with that's what's happening. Again, I can make the comparison to the new God of War from PlayStation when they released God of War and then put up God of War Ragnarok within that same time frame. This is the same kind of game mentality, where they put up a really good, solid foundation that is Zelda Breath of the Wild, and then they build on it with Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. It's being less received in some capacities because of the fact that it has the first game to build off of. And a lot of people are going to be making those very scathing and very correct criticisms, even though that doesn't hurt the overall gaming score, in my personal opinion. If a game is good, right, and it's just as good as another game within the same series, I should say, and that comparison is that it's the same game there, but plus more, like a new game plus kind of thing, I think that increases the score, or at least makes the score just as equal to the previous game, unless it completely fucks up and just destroys the original everything for whatever reason. Like, that to me is like a solid way of gauging scores.
Own focus, right? It is a completely original new thing. And where was I going with this? What that means is,
this is why you script your videos.
That it's difficult, very difficult, for the gaming establishment, the media, the YouTubers, the shills, to try and pretend that, like, this is a fluke, right? It's impossible for them to pretend that, like, there are other franchises that do what Zelda does better, like they have been doing for the past 30 years. Like, I grew up in an era where people were telling me Okami was better, that Darksiders was better, that like Dark Cloud was better, Fable was better. There was like a very God of War, like there were so many like examples of things like that. There was such a big push to try and like push the Zelda formula as being stale and outdated. Skyrim, Dark Souls were better. Like, and this is the same.
Oh yeah, that's right. We were talking about Elden Ring this whole time. I forgot. Like, you have spent the entirety of the 7 minutes of your 12-minute fucking video talking about nothing and giving praise to just Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and only now you get to your point. Wow. Just wow. But to go into a little bit more of your other points, if a person thinks that a game is better than another game, that's their opinion, man. It really much so is. It doesn't mean that they're trying to shill for another company or trying to just bury Nintendo's stuff. If they're being compared in some regards to other games, that's actually not that bad of a thing. I mean, I compare games all the time. But I have a certain criteria for games. And my criteria is this. If it's a new studio releasing a game in a new franchise, you need to judge it based on that game's either the merits of the devs and adjust your stuff accordingly, or you need to base it on, if it's a more well-established studio, base it on the studio's repertoire and previous works. Like, that's just a good, solid way of doing it, and I think in his mind, for anyone else, and this is a very subjective thing, for Harman, since most of their things to him are the most accredited games in the universe, that makes sense to him to kind of, do with the do. But whatever.
Thing with Elden Ring is that, like, it's the same thing, right? Like, all these franchises are propped up, they're weaponized against Nintendo, they're used to justify why game journalists and, like, gamers are not excited for the newest Nintendo thing, and then they're forgotten about, because outside of that specific thing, they serve no purpose. They're not particularly well-made games. They're not interesting. They're not fun. They're not memorable in any way. They don't really even have that much of an audience, compared to Zelda, right? But we're supposed to believe that these are some, like, major milestones in gaming. Even today, like, David Jaff is, like, being weaponized against Tears of the Kingdom. Like, he is one of those people coming out and trying to tell us that Tears of the Kingdom is a failure. It doesn't look that good. It's disappointing, just like Breath of the Wild. And I really have to wonder just how many times this guy, who hasn't made a game since God of War 2, like how much this guy can keep getting propped up as, like, you know, being someone.
I would say that he knows what he's talking about in the sense that he's a game developer. I mean, he's worked on games and stuff like that. But I would say if he's using David Chaffee as like a primary source for good gaming news and good gaming advice and as an unbiased opinion that Nintendo bad, everything else good, no. I'ma just say it. Just no. Stop. But we continue.
Who knows what he's talking about? Because if you're such a great game designer, why haven't you made anything since God of War? Right? You know, someone like Masahiro Sakurai has made like tons of great games, from like Kirby to Super Smash Bros. To Kid Icarus Uprising, but like David Jaffe, like he hasn't done anything. Like, he's a complete joke. Why would I ever take David Jaffe's opinion over like my own? Right? Like, why exactly? Like, I can tell you with no hesitation at all that I am better at video games than David Jaffe. And that's not me being like, you know, arrogant or just thinking too highly of myself. Like, just look at the gameplay comparison I did for Metroid Dread. Like, compare just what I did versus what he did, right? Watch him, like, play against, like, DSP. Like, DSP is legit better at games than David Jaffe. Like, why exactly am I supposed to take, like, the creator of God of War all that seriously? David Jaffe is a complete joke, right?
I mean, that's the one thing that I can agree with you on. David Jaffe is a pretty big joke in this context, and I'ma be clear, Chief. Just because you can play video games better than some old dude who's worked on some of the best games, most highly accredited games in the industry, at the time when he was making games and things like that, just because you can play video games better than him doesn't mean you know the market, doesn't mean you understand the market, doesn't mean you even get the market that he's talking about. But what do I know? I mean, I'm just a dude who also plays video games. Bro, I have a graphic design major that I just completed, as well as a minor with a specialization in marketing, meaning that I can do good marketing, unbiased research into something like this. Well, at least that's what I was trained to do, so, yeah.
All of these people are complete jokes, right? There was never any chance of Elden Ring competing with Zelda in any way, shape, or form, all right? Dark Souls is a franchise that was propped up by the gaming establishment to try desperately to present this narrative that, like, I don't, a hardcore alternative to Zelda existed, that it was like a Zelda game for mature gamers, and that's been like a thing since Dark Souls first came out, but
I have never in my life heard that narrative ever of someone comparing Dark Souls to Zelda, other than maybe for Breath of the Wild. However, I will say this, considering that, you know, Elden Ring was put up for and won the Game of the Year awards, kind of says a lot about it. Kind of does. Now, there's another, like, 2 minutes left of this video, but I'm gonna be honest, this video right here, mine, is going to be so fucking long because I just looked at the time, and it's, like, 30 minutes. So, sorry, just adjusting my chair. But I will say this, I'm gonna tap out right here, right now, because I think that right there is the most important bit. He thinks that just because Elden Ring was propped up to be, like, a last desperate attempt, I think that's a good place to end it. But yeah, that's really fucking stupid. That's really fucking stupid. Why? Because, I mean, can't a game just exist on its own? No, we have to compare everything. It's like, Nintendo was the best, stuff like that. Grumble, grumble, grumble. But here's what I will say as the final thought to this comparison. Number one, get to your point fucking quicker. Please do that. Like, if you're going to compare, right, Zelda to Elden Ring, get to your fucking point quicker. You spent 7 minutes of your goddamn video talking up Breath of the Wild and sucking its freaking dick so much that it's tickling the respiratory system from your fucking mouth. And you know, make the comparison and stuff. It's just whatever. In all honesty, I think that this video really sets the stage as to why Elden Ring really shat in his pants here. And you know what? Good. But I think that that's going to do it for me. This video is going to take way too long to edit, and I have to use another editing software and stuff. But hey, luckily I'm getting a new computer in like 10 to 15 days, thank God. It's going to have far more storage, and it's going to actually be able to allow me to edit videos faster and more high quality. So be prepared for that. Anyway, guys, my name is DaveNichols21. Thank you guys so much for the 500 subscribers and everything you guys have been doing. You guys have been awesome. Love you all. Let's see if we can hit 1K by the end of the year. And this video is an absolute dumpster fire kind of and a piece. Off.
Before you go through, you have to sign away.